Hello, I'm Alma Derricks, managing partner of Rev, and this is my love letter to Ben and Jerry's.
Welcome to Branding Love Letters, exploring the emotions brands evoke and the journeys they take us on. I'm Sam Thorogood, a graphic designer and your host. In each episode, I invite a guest to pick their favourite brand and unpack why it means so much to them. This podcast is a celebration of the branding that informs, impacts, and inspires us. So, without further ado,
I first met Ben and Jerry's in high school. So this is a Cherry Garcia moment. It's all about Cherry Garcia. It's ice cream perfection. During summer break in high school, I'd eat a pint every morning and then swim all day. So I was living my best teenage life, and Ben and Jerry's was right there with me. I wish I could still do that at that rate, but can't eat that much ice cream anymore. But that's what metabolism does for you when you're in high school.
I don't know in the UK if we have Cherry Garcia flavour. Could you describe it to me? I know it's a big one in the States, but I've never
Yeah,
tasted it.
you're missing out,
I'm
Sam.
missing out.
Yeah, you're missing the everything flavor. It's probably essentially a vanilla base, but it comes out a little bit pink because inside there are chunks of whole cherries and little broken pieces of chocolate, sort of swirled in what again probably vanilla at the bottom, and so it comes out kind of pinky purple, and every little bite has vanilla, cherry, and chocolate all blended into one.
My
It
word,
is divine.
that sounds incredible. And you were eating one of these a day.
Yeah, but I
Happy
swam
happy
all day
days.
and I was 16. So, I think that sort of takes care of it. So it was kind of easy. It was kind of all I ate during the summer.
Fantastic. So what was it? So if that kind of got you interested in them as a brand, what kind of kept you interested as you journeyed with them?
Well, I didn't know anything about their social mission at the time. I was young, but I did know instinctively, and it was interesting thinking about this. I knew instinctively they were doing something unconventional. They were doing something different. We'll talk about the literal look and feel of the actual cartons and things, but there was something about the way they stood out from all the other traditional brands, and there was something I knew that was again, just off the beaten path somehow. I also remember pretty early on, even before I understood the branding part of it, I was interested that they talked about fans and not consumers. And that was, I think, the first time I'd ever heard that. It's something, it's a little more common to talk about today, but this is early on. This is in the '80s, and just the idea that they referred to me and saw me as some kind of member of their community versus just a transactional person with a wallet, and it's really played out in everything else they've done. Well, what's so interesting is that they manage to keep an eye on the fact that ice cream is fun. At the end of the day, if the product weren't good, if Cherry Garcia weren't delicious, none of this would matter. But it's interesting that they live on two levels. They live sort of superficially as just an ice cream brand that you may love. And then they have this deep, deep core of social activism that's tied in completely and completely integrated into everything that they do. I'm fascinated that marketing and sort of their social activism group are just one and the same. They're closely synchronized inside the company. And it allows them to move pretty quickly because it's so embedded in their DNA, that type of thinking is embedded in their DNA. It makes them very nimble when it comes to things that are happening in real time. in the world. So it's fascinating that and I think for probably many of their customers, for their fans, probably a significant portion really just like the way the ice cream tastes. And then there's a group that really does see them and see them back and really appreciate them for this other piece that they use to really give voice to things using their platform. It's something they've made a core part of their business.
When you think of Ben and Jerry's, what emotions come to mind?
I mean, first of all, like yummy, yummy ice cream. I mean, I think it starts there. But I just, again, I find it so interesting that they have such a soul. I'm a big believer that brands are not just logo. It's mistaken sometimes. And I think if you ask 10 people, nine would say that brand equals the logo. And I'm a big believer that brand is, down to your toes. It goes all the way through. It's everything that you do. It's the way you treat your employees. It's what you stand for. And so what I really, like, I can't separate the feeling I have for them for appreciating their courage and really sticking to their guns on things that aren't always popular. They aren't always expedient, but they've decided that they want to use their platform to say things and to make a change. All you have to do is look at Twitter to understand that that's not easy. Every time and this has been for years, and Twitter's recent in their 40-year history, but it's not easy to take a stand, and we're particularly divisive right now. I think that's true around the world, not just in the States. And they get backlash for it, and yet they still continue to sell ice cream in places that probably largely culturally don't always agree with them. So that goes back to the first point of it's just great ice cream, and people. I sort of love the idea that people come together anyway, around ice cream. That's kind of an interesting notion and seems to be part of their positivity underneath the hood.
Take me back to the teenage Alma, getting those Cherry Garcia cartons. What was it about the packaging? What was it about the colors, the logo that was so appealing to you?
Oh yeah, I mean the cartons, for listeners who haven't seen them, are hand drawn. They look like comic strips or cartoons. So there's a hand drawn, very different. If you saw it sitting on the shelf with all the sort of formal names and brands, and some brands that are hundreds of years old, it just stands out because it looks like a little comic book sitting on the shelf in the freezer. The logo itself is sort of a hand drawn, almost like graffiti looking Ben and Jerry's. There's blue sky, there's sun, there are happy cows. It just looked different. I mean, and to this day, I still don't think anyone has really copied that. If you think of other brands that have even gone more formal or more premium, more gold edges and script and things like that, Ben and Jerry still has this very sort of casual, fun, different, unique, sort of going its own way kind of idea that I think really jives with the fact that they're from Vermont. Not necessarily the place that you think of, but having lived in New England for a little while, I can attest that New Englanders are huge ice cream people. So it's interesting later in life to realize that and recognize that if you could survive in Vermont or in Massachusetts or anywhere in New England as an ice cream maker, you're competing with some of the best ice cream on the planet, I think. And, if you can survive there and sort of meet the standards for people who you would think in a place that gets so cold, they wouldn't be such ice cream fans. They eat it year round. So they are connoisseurs of ice cream. And so, like, even that offbeatness, like coming from Vermont, I'd never been to Vermont. I'd never, been to that part of the country when I first discovered it. But there was something that said, we're different, we're going our own way. We kind of have our own, but we march to the beat of a different drummer. You could feel it. You could feel it in the look of the packaging, and it's still true, even after all these years.
And it's part of that difference, the fact that it's called Ben and Jerry. There's a story there. There's two people. There's instantly it's personal, isn't it? Rather than just being a kind of corporate thing. It's very personal.
For sure. And that it's first names, right? That it's first
Mm.
names and not last names. You could name it very formally, using their last names, but it's just Ben and it's just Jerry and it's friendly that way. It's very, it's very personalized in a way that I think was ahead of its time. I've watched as especially digital media. I think one of the things that we don't talk about a lot is that increasingly from websites to social, what's happened with branding is that the expectation is that brands are more human as we go. They have a voice. Think about Twitter and what that means. Every company that may have had copywriting and may have had a tagline now has to interact in a medium that's very personalized. You're talking as if you were a human being. You're anthropomorphized as if you could walk into the room, as if Ben and Jerry, the brand, could walk into the room. And so I think most brands have been challenged to find that humanity and find that voice and figure out how they sound. You can see it on Twitter with brands that get it and sound like somebody, sound exactly like you think they would if they could talk, if they could stand up and talk. And somehow, when I look at it now in retrospect with Ben and Jerry's, they found that 40 years ago when there was really no reason to. There was no urgency to it. There was no medium forcing you to do it. And yet they started with that very homespun, almost like they're inviting you into their kitchen, to have a bowl of ice cream. There is something very warm about that again made it stand out in its time, and I think still does today.
Have they done anything that's really surprised you?
It's interesting. Very recently, and I think this is what put them on my radar in the last few months, especially. One of the things that Ben and Jerry did when they sold the company to Unilever in 2000 was they stipulated that the company would keep an independent board that would specifically be responsible for maintaining the mission, the core mission and brand of the company. And Unilever said yes. Ben and Jerry's is a fabulous brand. And so in the course of that negotiation, they said, sure. And recently, just over the past year, the board of Ben and Jerry's sued Unilever, their parent company, over licensing the brand into parts of Israel that they took exception with. And the backlash was just unbelievable. Ben and Jerry are both Jewish themselves, and yet the company was accused of being anti-Semitic. Ben and Jerry are no longer running the company, but it's certainly not in their DNA to be anti-Semitic. But they have their own opinions as a company and on principle about the relationship between the Jewish state and Palestinians. And so this was something they went to bat for. And they lost in court the first part of the battle. The court said there's no definitive way you can say this will damage the Ben and Jerry's brand, even with the mission piece. But there's another suit that they're still pursuing, which again is just unprecedented for an internal company to sue their own parent. They've said, okay, if they're letting that rest, but they're saying, look, if we exist to defend this brand and to defend the mission of the company, then we need super deep clarification on what that means. Then we just may be at odds about what it means to defend that. And so in some ways, it's not altogether surprising. I think it's surprising in some ways that post Ben and Jerry's ownership, that they've continued to remain as steadfast and strong, which again is a testament to the strength of the brand. It's outliving the founders' day-to-day presence. But it's really been surprising to see them take this to the mat. And what I think is so interesting is that we're right in the midst of this huge conversation about ESG, about environmental, sustainability, governance, and social issues, and how companies should respond to that. And right in the midst of it, they're taking it, as they have from the beginning, they're pushing it even further and taking it to court to really ask this question. And I think it's an important conversation to have. That surprised me, like the lengths to which they would go. It'd be one thing to protest. It'd be one thing to send a stern letter saying we strongly disagree with this. they went to the mat with their own parent company to really force the issue. And I think that's kind of an amazing testament to their belief system and their core.
And as a fan, seeing them being so outspoken about so many different things, how does that affect your kind of relationship to the brand?
Yeah. For me, I tend to agree with them. So I think for me, it's not jarring. I appreciate it. There's so few opportunities on some of these issues where you feel seen. And I think it's really amazing that they take the time as a company to actually risk something. I think that's what it comes down to. There's so many performative versions of trying to show support and trying to demonstrate allyship, but somehow it rings a little thin unless you've really put something at risk. And they've put revenue at risk. They've put sales at risk for things that they believe. And I think that gives me hope that other companies can use the same platform to do the same thing. So it's not as jarring for me again because I tend to agree with them. I tend to be in the same ballpark with them. I understand that it makes other people angry, and if you sort of browse through Twitter, there are people who just want them. It's like the shut up and dribble idea, like shut up and make ice cream. Just I don't want to talk about this. And yet I'm of the opinion that you have to put these things out there. Part of what underlies a lot of the societal things that we're struggling with right now has everything to do with the fact that we don't talk about it, that we sweep things under the rug, that we don't have a common base of understanding to even approach an issue. So if you don't have the appropriate history, you can't even have an opinion, and have a conversation that connects. And so they've taken the stance that, we have to talk about this. It's interesting. I'll read an interesting part of one of their statements. It touched me that, in the midst of the post George Floyd statements and comments and, statements of solidarity and things, when I looked back, Ben and Jerry's had made a statement about Black Lives Matter in 2016, not in 2020. And they went on the record in a very strong way. It caused backlash. It caused, a lot of stir. But they closed this message, this long message about, just why we've come to this conclusion, what we think is important. And they said, we ask people to be open to understanding these issues and not to reflexively retreat to our current beliefs. Change happens when people are willing to listen and hear the struggles of their neighbor, putting aside preconceived notions and truly seeking to understand and grow. We'll be working hard on that and ask you to as well, your friends at Ben and Jerry's. And so I think whatever comes before that, whatever topic, whatever issue, that's kind of the heart of it. And businesses have such an outsized influence to not step into that fray a bit and risk some things, I think is to kind of silence such a huge part of certainly American society, but world society. And I think that you can't divorce yourself from it. I think of it as something I can't divorce myself from a lot of these issues. They're personal to me. And so I appreciate the fact that they see an opportunity to not look away when there's something that they think is worth amplifying, and they have a huge microphone. And the two founders continue to be very active and very vocal, even post Ben and Jerry's, post running the company. And I think there's something very special about that at a time when and I think finding a way to try and make that positive, not just screaming and yelling and being upset, but really basing it in a fundamental optimism about the tough conversations and the pain of that leading to something better on the other side. And I think that's something that also from a brand standpoint really does synchronize with what their product is, what ice cream is. It's how can you ever be sad eating ice cream? It makes you smile. So I think trying to combine those ideas and set a tone that says there's something better on the other side, I think is admirable.
Have there been any times when it's been harder to love the brand?
Again, not for me. I think I empathize with how hard it's been for them, because of these stands. I personally, again, it's not as difficult for me to see where they're coming from. So, I've never really had a falling out with Ben and Jerry's, if that's what you're asking. I mean, there's really been nothing that shocked me in a way that, was offensive or made it hard for me to continue to patronize them. I've never been conflicted about the things that they stand for, but I certainly understand the position they put themselves in. And so I empathize with that and sort of silent, just sort of they're rooting for them to not back down when they do have a position. And I think if they did ever take a stand on principle that I disagreed with, they've earned enough credibility as a brand with me that, just like any other friendship, you can agree to disagree on some things, but I find them to be so thoughtful about their activism and about their policy making that I sort of respect them generally for that, and could, if there were something that, just absolutely rubbed me the wrong way, I doubt that would force me out of the tent. It would just be one of those moments where, between friends, you just have to say, we just don't see this one the same way, because the majority of their opinions I agree with. And so that's what keeps any good friendship alive, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it's so fascinating, this conversation, because, ultimately they're an ice cream company, but we're discussing far kind of bigger things.
Yeah.
And I guess part of what they've achieved is that they invite these kind of conversations in a way that maybe other ice cream companies just don't. And it's really a
Right.
testament to what they are striving for, and the fact that they're a mission centered business, and that it's, of course, like you said, it's about great ice cream, but there's all this other stuff as well, which is actually really fundamental to who they are. You can't have one without the other with Ben and Jerry's, seemingly.
No, it's true. And I sort of imagine, I don't know this, and if Ben and or Jerry were here, we could ask. I sort of imagine that they didn't need the company to become a multinational global force. I think had those opinions that they took originally in 78 kept them hemmed in for that reason, kept them small and mom and pop and, one shop in Vermont. I sort of imagine that that would have been just fine as long as they were paying their bills and the business was right side up. I don't think they needed it to grow at all costs. And they did not at the cost of compromising what it is they were trying to say. And had they remained a regional brand, that would have been fine. I get the feeling that that would have been fine. And yet they caught a wave in 78 that resonated with a lot of people. And they've done a lot of good things along the way. So I think that it's the doing well by doing good, in action. It's really an example that those two things are possible. You can hold both of those things in your mind and still build a profitable commercial business. And I think that's a compelling thought. We need more of those.
As you look back, your kind of story with this brand, how would you summarize it? How would you summarize your journey with Ben and Jerry's as a brand?
I've gone from the shallowest of motives, just again, every time I say Cherry Garcia, it just makes me happy. The shallowest of reasons. It was just good tasting, crazy good ice cream. And I've sort of progressed. It's almost matured. My relationship with them has matured. I became an admirer from a a social and mission driven side. That side of them became something I continued to fall deeper in love with. And then as a branding professional and as a marketer, to really appreciate, as I learned more and became more sophisticated, to really understand how precious and unique what they've built is. So I think it's one of those relationships that started with a crush, like a really simple crush, and over lots of years, it's just grown into a really deep admiration for what it is that they've built and what they continue to build and what they stand for. It's more needed than ever. So it's not even just a nice to have. It's not just that they're doing good things and isn't that cute. It's who knew that we would need it this much 40 years later and would need that messaging 40 years later.
Alma, let the listeners know where people can connect with what you're doing.
Absolutely. You can learn more about my brand entrepreneurship consultancy. It's called Rev at www.rev.la. So www.rev like Victor.la. And on LinkedIn and on Twitter, I'm just very simply Alma Derricks, ALMA DERRICKS.
Fantastic. So finally, I'd love for you just to read out the love letter that you've written to Ben and Jerry's.
Sure, I kind of kept it short and sweet. You've
Short and
heard
sweet's good.
a lot of my all of my gushing so far, but I kept it sweet, short and sweet. Dearest Ben and Jerry's, thank you for your vision, your voice, your courage, and your soul, and for Cherry Garcia. After 40 years, you're still young at heart, making us think and making the world a much sweeter place. XOXOXO, Alma Derricks.
Well, Alma, thank you very much for letting us hear your branding love letter.
Thank you so much for asking me.
You've been listening to Branding Love Letters, and I've been Sam Thorogood. I'm on a mission. Equip pioneers like you to bring others onto your journey. Come and find out more at www.pilgrimage.design. Thanks for listening. Oh, and big thanks to Thomas Thorogood for the music. Take it away, Tommy boy.